Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise today to speak against the Building and Construction Industry Improving Productivity Bill 2013. Now, this government tells us that the establishment of the ABCC is critical because there is widespread corruption within the union movement, that we have a productivity problem within the construction sector, and, to use their words, we need a tough cop on the beat to deal with those issues. But unfortunately, much like a lot of the government's current agenda, very heavy on rhetoric, very light on when it comes to facts. So let's have a look at what this bill does, and then let's also look at the history of the ABCC. And there is no better way to examine whether an institution like this will be effective. There's no better way of examining that than to go back to the record and look at what the ABCC did when it was established under the previous government, the previous Conservative government. So the first thing the bill does is that it strips away some very basic rights that are afforded to people right across the community. It says because you work in the construction industry, you deserve fewer rights than people who work in other industries. In fact, some of the most basic rights that are afforded to common criminals are stripped away through this legislation. It treats construction workers worse than common criminals. It removes the presumption of innocence. It effectively sets up a star chamber. There are the incredible coercive powers that mean that construction workers are subject to secret interrogations. They're forced to answer questions under oath, and effectively creating a form of industrial apartheid. The question, of course, arises, which is what has led to the establishment of the ABCC initially, and what was the performance of the ABCC once it was established. Well, we know that, again, under the Howard government, there was a Royal Commission into the construction industry. We saw, as a result of that Royal Commission, that that there were allegations of criminal wrongdoing, and yet not one successful prosecution as a result of that Royal Commission. Now, despite that, we saw the establishment of the ABCC. The ABCC, we were told, that was going to eliminate corruption and productivity, improve productivity within the sector. What we saw, in fact, was that when the ABCC was established, that productivity in the construction sector actually decreased. We know that productivity has improved since the abolition of the ABCC, making a mockery of the notion that somehow establishing the ABCC will do something to transform our economy and get Australia moving in the right direction. We know what economic levers are important to start tackling some of those challenges that we face, and yet we have a government resorting to a tired, old ideological position, prosecuting an agenda for the establishment of the ABCC, which we now know, based on the performance of when the Commission was established, does nothing for productivity. We also know that one of the great dangers of working in the construction industry is that people often don't return home. It's a very dangerous industry. We know that there are a number of breaches of occupational health and safety laws. We also know that the ABCC didn't take one employer or take action against any employer over breaches of occupational health and safety laws, despite the track record of significant harms and indeed deaths within that industry. In fact, it presided over an increase in the number of deaths in the industry. So we know that this is a commission that is completely unrelated to productivity. We know that, if anything, occupational health and safety deteriorated under the commission. We know that it strips away some basic rights from innocent people, and we know that when it comes to the coercive powers, we are effectively creating a separate class of laws for people simply because of the industry in which they work. Yes, of course there are significant industries within the construction industry, and that is that many of those people who go to work don't come back home at night. We know that there are problems with labour from overseas, people being exploited on $10 or $12 an hour through sham contracting, and yet not a word on this from the current government. So what's going on here? Why is it that we have what looks like a deliberate, and let's not forget that the parliament has been prorogued because this is a question of such important national interest and urgency that we've taken the extraordinary step of proroguing the parliament? Well, the answer is very simple. As I said earlier in my reply to the Governor-General, the coalition is a divided party. They are a shambolic party. They are, at the moment, riven with differences over social and economic policy. So they are bereft of an agenda, bereft of an economic agenda. We kept hearing about the GST. We kept hearing about some of those important economic reforms that we would see in terms of income tax cuts and so on. And yet there's no agreement because they are a party that is divided. They're divided on social policy. We have the Prime Minister who says he's a strong supporter of marriage equality, yet we have those homophobes and bigots within the coalition who, on the back of the Safe Schools coalition, took extraordinary action in preventing what is a program designed to try and stop bullying in schools, to engage in a review into what was a sensible program. So what is the response from the coalition? It's, well, what is going to bring the coalition together more than a bit of good old-fashioned union bashing? And that's why we're here. We're not here because of concerns about corruption. We are not here because of concerns around productivity. If there was genuine concern around the notion of corruption, then what we would be doing is we would be looking at the misconduct of those financial institutions, indeed into those sectors economy-wide that we know are engaged in illegal and corrupt activity. And that's why the Greens have long campaigned for the establishment of a Royal Commission. Indeed, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, who has led the charge for a Royal Commission into the banking and financial sector, where we know that there is a litany of misconduct and corrupt behaviour that is adversely impacting on millions of ordinary Australians. And the list is long. It is indeed long. We have the allegations where the Commonwealth Bank gave customers bad advice, over 1,000 of them, compensated to the tune of $52 million. Another 8,000 further applications made for review, more compensation, millions to follow. We had a similar example with the National Australia Bank, $16 million in compensation. Macquarie Bank, another $14 million in compensation. We had the farce where the ANZ charged people for services that they did not receive, another $30 million in compensation. We've got some of our big banks, the ANZ and Westpac, being charged with rigging interest rates, currently a matter being investigated. We had that remarkable situation with the Commonwealth Bank, with a ComInsure, where we had people whose claims were ignored. In fact, we saw the definition of common medical conditions, like a heart attack, being changed so that those insurers could avoid paying their legislated responsibility. Remarkable stuff, absolutely remarkable. So if we're talking about corruption, if we're talking about wrongdoing, well, let's support a Royal Commission into the finance and banking sector. I'm reminded of Senator Brandis's comments saying there is no difference between a dodgy boss and a dodgy union official. Well, if that's the case, and you're prepared to support a Royal Commission into unions, well, then you should support the Greens' call for a Royal Commission into the banking and finance sector. And if the government was serious about tackling corruption and wrongdoing, it would also get behind the Greens' call to establish a national anti-corruption watchdog. And we've had that policy costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, and wouldn't you know it, The cost of a national anti-corruption watchdog is very similar to the amount that was spent on the Trade Union Royal Commission. So instead of having a politically motivated Royal Commission into a group of political enemies for the sake of trying to keep one side of politics united, for the sake of doing that, we have now spent what we could have spent on establishing a permanent, ongoing institution to stamp out corruption in all of its forms. In all of its forms. So instead of supporting the creation of a national anti-corruption watchdog, a Royal Commission into banking and finance, it's brought us all back here, nominally for 3 weeks, so we can fight the same old battles of last century and try and ensure that we have a united coalition, party room and a divided nation. And whenever a government acts in its own narrow self-interest rather than the national interest, it is doomed to fail. And that's what we're witnessing with the Turnbull government right now. Mr Acting Deputy President, the Greens have long supported the role of the union movement within society. We know that trade unions were founded with the purpose of protecting the rights of ordinary working people, and they have much to be proud of, we know that when things go wrong in workplaces, it's unions that step up and represent the interests of ordinary working people. We know that the union movement, right across not just Australia but right across the developing world, are playing an important role in protecting the rights of ordinary citizens, some of whom have very few rights afforded under the regimes that they are governed by. So we stand here and oppose the implementation of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. We're guided by the evidences on this. We know that when the Commission was previously installed, it did nothing to improve productivity or health and safety. We understand this is an ideological position not supported by evidence and really established with the intent of keeping a divided party room on the same page. And we will oppose vigorously any moves to have this body which treats ordinary people within the construction industry worse than common criminals.
Thank you, Senator.